Hello there, welcome back to the channel. This is Nerd World Empire, and today looking at the Ferengi Alliance. Originally introduced as an antagonist to the Federation, believed to be the new big bad, Starfleet would quickly learn that the Ferengi just kind of like to seem mean and nasty. Although they do have some mean and nasty qualities, they are by no means fighters, and we're going to explore their culture today. Before we get started, please like, share, subscribe and comment down below on your thoughts on the Ferengi, because I know that especially in Deep Space Nine, where we do get them explored more extensively than we do in the Next Generation or in Voyager, or Enterprise for that matter, we have many divisive episodes. And with that said, let's get started on the Ferengi Alliance. The Ferengi Alliance claims that it took approximately 10,000 years to evolve their current modern Ferengi culture and their society as we see it, although we do have evidence that the Ferengi has regressed by certain other elements when the Grand Nagus was altered to an earlier state. That the Ferengi were once a much more altruistic society, and somehow the evolutionary social pressures of their society turned them into a corporatocracy, which we'll get to in a moment. The Ferengi as a species are smaller than the average human and physically weaker. Although they do have extraordinarily sensitive hearing and sharp pointy teeth for some reason, the Ferengi do seem to be predominantly a carnivorous species. They are by no means predatory, and likely their ancestors were some kind of scavengers or opportunistic hunters, which would make sense for the opportunistic culture of the Ferengi itself. They were first actually encountered by Starfleet and humanity that we know of in the mid-22nd century, although this contact was somewhat unofficial and neither side identified themselves. Official first contact with the Ferengi came after years of hearing rumour and speculation of their existence, and would eventually formally be done in the 2360s, although as I said, there were multiple other former encounters, notably the Battle of Maxia, which saw the disabling of the USS Stargazer in an engagement with an unknown alien vessel we would later learn was a Ferengi ship, a pirate vessel of some kind. The whole of Ferengi culture seems to be centered around the idea of the acquisition and accumulation of wealth and power. Their society is patriarchal to the extreme extent where many Ferengi are uncomfortable around females of other species, where Ferengi females are not permitted, or at least not without special dispensation, to travel off Ferenginar at all. I'm going to be doing a video on the treatment of Ferengi women, so I'm not going to stay on that video on that topic for too long right now, but suffice it to say, it sucks to be a Ferengi female, or married to a Ferengi male, no matter what species you are, I think. Their society, as I said, is based around the acquisition of wealth and power. To the Ferengi, power and status comes from being rich. They're the literal capitalist society gone to the extreme, more so than any current state we have on Earth right now, or at any point in human history. The Ferengi, however, despite their aggressive trading and their treacherous nature, they have actually never had a major interstellar war, with the Ferengi even once stating that Starfleet and humanity in particular is jealous of the Ferengi, because the Ferengi remind humans of how they used to be, greedy, selfish and short-sighted, not unlike how the Ferengi are now. Only the Ferengi are far worse, but the Ferengi also know that humanity is a history of warfare. Domestic civil wars, like the major wars of Earth's history, the Napoleonic, First, Second and Third World Wars, the Eugenics Wars. And then once humanity went into space, one of the first things it started doing was warring. Humans go forth with a message of peace, as the Ferengi saw it, but ultimately try to impose their will and their way on others, and when there is pushback from that, there is war. War with the Cardassians, war with the Klingons, war with the Borg, war with the Romulans, war with the Dominion. Now, of course, Starfleet never fought an offensive war, or at least it tried to avoid it, but when drawn into a war they were willing to fight. And this was something the Ferengi tended to avoid at all costs. The Ferengi were willing to fight. They were willing to fight individual battles, but again, they were opportunistic. They would fight an opponent they were more guaranteed to win. The Ferengi would use diplomacy, bribery, or politics, whatever was necessary to avoid open war, because open war that the Ferengi themselves are involved in is not good for business. The Ferengi, although like to portray themselves as fighters and mean, this is mostly to intimidate and not to actually come from a desire to engage in hostility with you, mostly because they're smaller, they're weaker, and they're not great fighters. Their weapons technology, although is comparable to that of the Federation, is quite different. Again, I'll be doing a breakdown of Ferengi tech, such as the Marauders, in a future video, but the main capital ship of the Ferengi is representative of this philosophical outlook. The Ferengi, when engaging in battle, often use sneak attacks. Their vessels are designed to mask their weapons. Their ships are similar in shape to the symbol of the Ferengi Alliance, but the vessel is both designed to be intimidating and strong, but also built to be a freighter with unusually large cargo capacity for a vessel you would call a marauder and think of as some kind of combat vessel. This is again representative of Ferengi culture, trying to look mean, but at the same time really it's just an upgunned freighter. That's effectively all a marauder is. And the Ferengi live their whole lives around this philosophy. Their entire society is built on you only have meaning if you are wealthy and if you can accumulate more profit. The whole society revolves around the rules of acquisition, which are a set of guiding principles for which the Ferengi seem to live. And although there is indications there are other laws and rules and regulations set down by individual bodies, all Ferengi use the rules of acquisition not so much as a set of laws, but as a set of guiding principles from which their society derives its direction from. In terms of their culture, again, women are at the bottom all the time. Men are the head of the household, and they are the ones who are expected to earn profit and make their families prosperous. This comes to the extreme of just having an audience with a wealthy individual Ferengi. You have to pay them a commission, a token, a tip, just to talk to them. The Nagus being a very good example of this, often dishing out financial advice in exchange for himself gaining either a portion of what you're going to do, or at the very least just for the advice and an audience with him to ask him just a single question. You've got to pay, and pay homage as well by kissing his staff. The Ferengi, as I stated, are a corporatocracy, which is something that does exist on Earth, although in a more limited fashion. Disney, for example, have tried to do what basically the Ferengi are. Disney are the Ferengi. Basically, this means it's a corporation that rules everything. The Ferengi don't have a traditional government. They don't have a president or a prime minister or a king or an emperor. They have a Nagus, and a Nagus is a businessman who is the wealthiest, the most powerful, and most successful. Or at least he usually is. Sometimes there'll be variation in this, but basically the Ferengi Nagus, the Grand Nagus, is the wealthiest, most powerful Ferengi, and this is a title given to him. He's the head of a company or a business such a man like Donald Trump or Elon Musk would qualify to be a Nagus. And by just being the most powerful, the other Ferengi decide that this person will be the one who leads us because he's clearly the shrewdest, the most ruthless, the most intelligent amongst us, and the most worthy to lead. He gets the nice little scepter of power that the Ferengi have, which other Ferengi are expected to kiss when they see it. His mere presence makes other Ferengi cower and quiver in his presence, like you would with a king. And basically, it's like appointing a businessman as king just because he's a very successful businessman. He then dictates how the Ferengi Alliance will operate and the rules. He can also amend the rules of acquisition, the only one who's allowed to do so, and he again doles out advice to other businessmen and gets them to do different things, but he has to be successful, and he actually has to give good advice, not bad advice that would only benefit himself, because as much as the Ferengi appreciate ruthlessness, if he's basically screwing over the others all the time, then he's not a very good Nagus and he's not a good role model leader for their people in a sense. So basically he's a king in everything but name. He can be replaced, basically voted out, either for corruption in a way that isn't typically Ferengi corrupt, or for abuse of power, or from possibly defying traditional Ferengi values, like trying to rewrite the rules of acquisition to be all peaceful, loving and happy and telling them to share their money, which would really go against the grain for the average Ferengi. Below the Nagus there are various organizations that help in the administration and rule of their society, such as the FCA. And these organizations help the Nagus and Ferengi society operate. And although they are the closest thing to authorities the Ferengi have, because the Ferengi do seem to have some laws and rules that are all laid down by the wealthy businessmen, it's still fairly open to interpretation a lot of the time. As I said, the rules of acquisition are not law, they're just guiding principles, a bit like a guiding principle of thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal. Although those two probably aren't in the rules of acquisition, but you get what I mean. That's basically what those are, they are not law. So, in a corporatocracy, most land and those things is probably owned by businesses. Only the wealthy will get to own their own. And like Disney did, look this up, they built an entire settlement, an entire town, which they expected their employees to live in and other people to come and live in, but they would own it and they collect rents off everyone. They laid down basically how everyone was supposed to live and operate and where they would go to work, and they controlled the transport networks. Basically, the company would control everything and get very rich, but everyone at the bottom would stay there. Almost like indoctrinated slavery, serfdom, as you might call it. Although Ferengi society is not geared to keep people at the bottom, it is geared to allow all Ferengi the opportunity to collect profit and become more than what they started out as. In fact, this is openly encouraged because what's good for one Ferengi is good for all Ferengi. They want all the wealth and all the power, and that's how they see getting it. They're not soldiers, they're not fighters, they're not Klingons, they're not Romulans, they're not sadistic and ruthless like Romulans. They're not insidious like humans, and they're not warriors like Klingons, and they're not overbearing like the Dominion or the Cardassians. They are profiteers, they are businessmen, and they gain power through wealth. Societies like humans this doesn't work as well on because humans don't desire wealth in the same way. And there is an argument to be made that Ferengi are idiots in a society that have replicator technology, when they can pretty much replicate anything they need, but I'm going to try and explain that as much as I can as my final point on this, because it is something that comes up a lot with the Ferengi. Why do they desire wealth so much when everything they want they can just be replicated? And I suspect corporatocracy. They likely put rules and regulations on the replicators. We also see that replicators, although are accessible widely in the Federation, on Earth and on such worlds, we do know that on planets like Bajor they don't exist. Other worlds they don't exist. Now the Ferengi do have them, but as the Ferengi are a corporate-based society, most Ferengi probably don't. The Ferengi also like to eat live food, a bit like Klingons, which is something you can't replicate. So my guess would be the Ferengi regulate who has access to replicators and probably charge everyone for using them, a bit like a vending machine. So yeah, the wealthy might be able to replicate most things, but also replicators can't replicate everything. We know that gold-pressed latinum can't be replicated, and if you create a replicated forgery, it's not got no value. Replicated products are also widely cited as being lower quality than a lot of manufactured goods. Like, people notice that food and drink that's replicated isn't as nice as food and drink that was grown, cooked and made. There's also materials. Many materials are perfectly good replicated. Some, however, are not. Some materials are purely, they are a replicated material, so they are what they are. But a replicated facsimile of, say, titanium may not be as good as the original piece of titanium that was scanned to replicate. This probably explains why the Ferengi don't value it. The Ferengi are probably geared a culture which cultivates the idea that yes, replicators exist and they're a useful tool, but they ain't that great. So they go down a route of everything's custom, everything's customized, everything's handmade. It would probably drive the prices up and keep their society ticking over. Now the Ferengi do need to change, and they do have to evolve, which I will explore in another video when I cover the Nagus. But as they stand, and as they will carry on going forward, the Ferengi are ruthless, sometimes cruel, sometimes magnanimous. And like any species, they've got diversity within their society and room for growth and improvement. And many of them are good people, but they're ruled over and set a standard by maybe not the classiest individuals, although Grand Nagus Zek was not actually that bad of a man, all things considered. For a start, he began freedom for women and rights for women on the Ferengi culture after Ishtar managed to get him, laid. Anyway, that is the Ferengi culture. They hail from the planet of Ferenginar. They have a very old culture. They've been warp capable a little bit longer than humans, maybe by about 50 or 60 years, but not a great deal longer. They are what's considered one of the younger races, and are sometimes feared for being pretty ruthless and aggressive, but they are mostly known for being untrustworthy. But let me know what you think about the Ferengi. Do you love them? Do you hate them? How can you hate Quark? He's a beautiful man.
I just want to take this moment to thank you for watching that video. If you liked what you saw, please check out my social links in the description box below to Instagram and Twitter and others, and also is down there a link to my Patreon page where you can support this channel and the others as I try to grow this franchise and do this more regularly. If you made it all the way to the end of this video, thank you for watching, and bye bye.